Good afternoon, everybody. The reason why I wanted to come here and talk with you is because we've, in a sense, lost 3 generations of young people. And I never imagined that in my lifetime, we'd lose these young potential rebels and turn them into medicalized conformists. And to me, this is really scary. And one of the things I've been doing recently, well, more than recently, is trying to understand a few things as to what is really happening here. In my work, I'm particularly interested to understand why the transgender ideology gains such a powerful ascendancy in such a short period of time. You kind of blink your eyes, and then you realize that it's become so fashionable that even some of your best friends have bought into that. And so that's the first thing I was interested in. And then secondly, in my work as the director of MCC Brussels, a think tank there, I became interested in why is it that all these parliamentarians, and as the previous speaker said, these parliamentarians are fairly simple people who can barely spell the word gender, nevertheless feel that gender ideology is really what they should be supporting. And that goes across the political divide. Why is it that that has occurred? Because in Brussels, in the European Union, you have a situation where the EU has become a transmission belt for transgender ideology. And they do it not by saying we're giving you a dose of transgender ideology. They do it in a kind of very dishonest way. They never talk about transgenderism. They always talk about gender ideology. And of course, nobody can possibly object to gender ideology. I mean, who's against, sort of equality between men and women? But when they talk about gender equality, what they're always doing is they're sneaking in transgenderist ideas. And this dishonest project, where they self-consciously try to make sure that things change without any public debate, without any public discussion, is really the main way that this institution has operated. As a result of this, in the European Union, we now have a situation where gender mainstreaming and gender conditionality have become the norm. Gender mainstream basically means that gender ideology influences virtually every single decision that the European Union makes. And it means, for example, that if you're a theater group in Croatia, or you are trying to build a road in Poland, when you ask for money, they basically say, what are you doing for trans people? What is the trans element in your road building project? And it is bizarre, right? Can you imagine those engineers who have never heard of any of this stuff having to tick the box and say that we'll have 3 trans manual laborers working on the road? So it is a bizarre notion. And in a sense, what's really important about this, what they call gender equality or gender perspective, is that what it's really doing is that it's discrediting the foundation. It's discrediting the foundation of the norms of biological sex. They really are interested in undermining the foundational distinction between men and women. And whenever they talk about women, if you look at the formal official language, they talk about women in their diversity, as if somehow there are diverse types of women, which I've never met. I've only seen women, but not diverse types of women. And when they don't talk about diversity in relation to women, they talk about heterogeneity. They say that men and women are heterogeneous characters. Now, I don't know how many people in this room are heterogeneous, but in the real world, we tend to be fairly homogeneous. I'm a man, and I don't think there's anything heterogeneous about me when it comes to my biology, and same thing with women. The second thing that I've discovered that is really quite important and very scary is that the main vehicle, the main medium through which the institutionalization of gender ideology has occurred has been a number of non-government organizations. And these non-governmental organizations are zealous. I mean, when I say zealous, they really are zealous. I mean, they really think that turning the world into one that's dominated by transgenderist ideology is a kind of form of salvation for humanity. And they are very, very active because in the European Union, what happens is that parliamentarians and the Commission rely on what they call stakeholders. And these stakeholders then make proposals of what the ideology, what the policy should be. And then they say, we consulted the public. And the public usually is the same for NGOs. I've never been invited to give my particular views in relation to that. And what's also important about this is that gender ideology and the way that it's kind of promoted by these NGOs works in such a way that they are actually saying quite explicitly that one of their roles is to ensure that there is money and resources to fight gender-critical sort of activists. And I thought that was interesting. And I think that there's a good bit in that because the reason why they want to fight gender-critical activists is because they believe that gender-critical activists have triumphed in Britain, which they haven't, but they've done better than anywhere else. And therefore, from their point of view, you know, we want to avoid anything remotely like this in the European Union. So basically, they are doing things like organizing research projects on gender-critical individuals to find out who they are, try to find dirt on them. And this is being funded by the institutions of the European Union. So you can see how totalitarian this whole project has become. And you've got to understand that they are quite totalitarian in their orientation. They don't hold back. They're not into empathy. They're not into dialogue. They're into destroying people like us, you know, without a shadow of a doubt. So I think this is really quite important. And I think, as people suggested earlier on, gender ideology is always piggybacks on other concerns. So you can have a seminar in Brussels on gay marriage. And again, most people are sympathetic now to gay marriage. And then you kind of, before you can say gay marriage, they talked about trans people, how important it is to respect them, how important it is to give them a prominent voice. So virtually every issue, every equality issue that has gained public support becomes a vehicle for promoting this ideology. And I call transgender ideology an ideology without a name, because it never acknowledges itself as what it is. It always works surreptitiously behind the back of people. And that's something that we need to work. Now, there's two ways the European Union promotes gender ideology, a hard way and a soft way. The hard way is gender mainstreaming, where basically you're told, or gender conditionality, you're told that unless you introduce a gender component into your project, you're not going to get money. And they tell that to individual projects, but also to states. So every government knows who wants to get money from the European Union that they play the role that's assigned to them by gender ideologists. And that's one way in which the most unlikely places, places that are very religious or not very conservative even, gradually begin to promote gender ideology, and they kind of promote the leaflets and the films and everything else. So that's the one way that it's being promoted. And the second way it's being promoted is in a soft way, soft propaganda. So for example, very recently, I came across an initiative, it's very soft because, you know, it just sounds really nice. It's the European Union Prize for Gender Champions, right? For gender champions. Now, I thought I could apply for that. You know, as a gender champion, why not? You know, sort of good money. I could use it for drinks and stuff. And but then you look closer, and it becomes very evident that when they talk about gender champions, they really mean transgender champions. That's really what they're getting at. And they want organizations to demonstrate their love of transgenderist ideology and compete for a prize, which is 100,000 euros. Not millions, but enough to get you to think in a particular kind of a way. And the second way they do it, and this is part of the soft policy, is they are keen advocates of what's called comprehensive sexuality education. Now, you probably all know this. When I came to Brussels, I didn't know it had to be comprehensive. But comprehensive sexuality education, if you look at the curriculum that they're promoting through the European Union, has got nothing to do with sex, as you and I understand it. It's not about intimate relationships, about the biology of sexual interaction. Comprehensive sexuality education has as its main role to distance young people from the adult world, and in particular from their parents. So when you look at the curriculum, and one of the things I've been doing is looking at the curriculum of all these different school initiatives. The curriculum usually begins by saying that children are never too young to have sexual feelings. And even at the age of 3 and 4, they could use with some kind of sexual guidance. Now, you can imagine what that means. It basically means that we're sexualizing young kids at a very, very early age. As a sociologist, we call this the adultification of childhood, where little 3-, 4-year-olds become little adults. So they tell us that even at that age, they can use some of our advice, because sexuality is something that is really critically important. And in their eyes, nothing matters more than sexuality. And sexuality has got nothing to do with sex even, because if you examine the origins of the term, sexuality is about your identity, right? It's not about your sexual preference or anything of that sort. It's about your identity. So already at the age of 3, 4, they're beginning to brainwash or indoctrinate young kids about sexuality. But what's even worse is when you look at the curriculum and they say when you're 6 and 7, 8, or 9, you already know your sexual needs probably better than your parents, right? So basically what you're saying is your mom and dad are a bunch of assholes when it comes to understanding anything to do with sex. But you, little 6, 7, 8-year-old, have got this very sophisticated understanding of your sexual needs. And what they are saying is that because you understand your sexual needs better than your parents, you should ignore parental advice. You should ignore what mom and dad say. And what they are really getting at, of course, is when they're saying that you, as 6, 7, 8-year-old, know your sexual needs, what they are really saying is that you know your sexual needs because it's been recycled through what your teacher has told you. So in a sense, it basically gives the sexuality indoctrinator a privileged role, that they're cultivating your imagination, that becomes far preferable than knowing what your parents want or your parents need. And I think that element of indoctrination and self-consciously distancing young people from the adult world and their parents is the most insidious consequence of what's happening, is because if parents become psychically distant from their children, then it basically means that the so-called experts, the sexuality experts, are given a free pass to indoctrinate the children with whatever is the latest transgenderist fad. And I think that is really, to me, sort of very, very important. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about, and it's not just the EU, but something I think is really quite important, is that people here in this room experience the problem as parents or as activists or people who are really concerned with this phenomenon of gender ideology. But the thing that is really quite important is that gender ideology is really not a standalone element, not a standalone phenomenon working in society, because virtually every dimension of our cultural experience is dominated by similar concerns. Have you ever heard the word non-binary? I'm sure you have. But the word non-binary now applies not only to man and woman, the way that binary, the concept of binary has been pathologized, means that every single civilizational boundary that's the foundation of our life is called into question. That's our culture. So the distinction between man and woman just goes. Right? People say it's a false distinction altogether. Then the distinction between adults and children go as well, because you have the adultification of childhood and the infantilization of adulthood running along at the same time. And then you kind of blink your eyes, and then you discover that the distinction, the binary distinction between human and animals is also now going. And they're not talking about animals being able to give consent, right? The same people that are telling us that men and women are fluid categories are now saying that the distinction between animals and humans is also a fluid category. And when you have virtually every boundary being called into question, then what you've got is a powerful cultural force that transcends the problems that you're facing. I mean, you're just a specific target of that. But the whole of our culture has been subjected to this form of ideology, and which is really, really quite important. Because it seems to me that the way in which this ideology has moved forward has been remarkably successful. And one of the things that I'm really concerned about is that as I go around Europe, it hasn't just simply captured institutions, but virtually everybody other than what I would call real people, right? Because there are some real people who are horrified about what's happening, but because they're horrified about what's happening, they're not able to express that horror, because the minute they open their voice, they get shut down. And this is the key battleground for us. They can shut people down because they succeeded in suggesting that anybody that criticizes transgender ideology are either far-right or fascist or haters, or there's a variety of different labels that people are using. And people are really scared to open their mouth. Our job, I think, is to give them confidence to say and articulate and voice what in their hearts of hearts they already know. Our job is through personal example, through a bit of bravery ourselves, stand up and say that the emperor's got no clothes, that everything that they're putting forward that everything that they are arguing and putting forward is fundamentally false and fundamentally wrong. Our job, in a sense, in this kind of situation, is to stand up for the younger generations. If we don't take responsibility for young people and fight, and I mean really, really fight, then nothing much is going to happen. If we play the game according to their rules, and I think our side has often played the game according to their rules. They take the initiative, and we react. They take another initiative, and then we react. The trouble is that when you react, you can never do things as strongly as the people that have initiated things. So the time has come for us to initiate things. We've got to initiate things. We've got to start stuff and get them to react. Right? Because unless they react to us, we're not in a position to change the narrative. We have got to create the narrative of what it means to be a boy or a girl, a man and a woman. That narrative has got to be put forward in a brave and uninhibited way. One of the things that we're doing in Brussels, my organization, is we're doing it's a bit of a test. We're doing a petition, which is allowed to do a citizens' initiative petition, where if you collect a million signatures from 6 countries, then you can create and begin a discussion around it. And we decided to create a petition that basically tries to focus on one question, which is, do you want young children to undergo gender transition? And we believe that there are millions of people out there, normal people out there, who know in their hearts of heart that that's not what they want. They don't want young children to be given the opportunity to undergo that kind of process, whether it's social or medical. And we are hoping is that by creating a petition, whatever happens to the petition doesn't really matter. What matters is that we start a discussion. We start a debate. We make parents aware of the fact about what is really happening to their children. So that's one of the things that we're doing. But the other thing that we're trying to do at the moment is to basically change the language. Basically change the language that is used. And whenever they use these euphemistic terms, like gender perspective, gender equality, whenever they use this kind of opaque language, we got to really insist, well, what do you mean by this? Make your intentions explicit. And I think that if you can change the language and create a language ourselves, which validates everything that we stand for, new words, new ideas being promoted in that kind of a way, then we have a chance to fight back and eventually succeed. It's not going to happen tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. It's going to be a long, long, long fight, but I'm determined that we shall get some really, really good results before I die. Thank you. Yeah. There is a bit of time for discussion. Yeah.
Sure. Hello, my name is Faika El Nagashi. I'm one of those parliamentarians. So I'm a member of parliament in Austria with the Greens. Thank you for your input. There are 2 points I would like to make. So one was about gender mainstreaming. It's almost like a remnant from the past when you talk about gender mainstreaming. That was something that came up in the 1990s, and for very good reason. It referred to equality between men and women, and to look into every measure and every process and how it affects equality between men and women, and especially women and women's rights. And I think it is very good that you're revisiting this, because it reminds us all about the aspect of women's rights and how women's rights are getting ignored in the discussions that we have these days. So we talk a lot about gender, and as you say, gender mainstreaming has the word gender in it, but it's not about women's rights anymore, and a lot of these issues get confused. But the second point that I would like to make, and I'm very happy that you address not only the EU context, which is very relevant for a lot of the EU countries, but also the political aspect. So what happens often is that organizations, maybe like yours, the Matthias Corvinus College from Hungary, that has a specific approach and position, promotes some approaches and positions. And then others on the leftist spectrum or the progressive spectrum have other positions. And there is a political divide and a strong polarization. And often there's a dynamic between these two sides that is not focused on the content. So my question to you is, do you see a way to bridge this divide that focuses on actual issues and content and not on the dynamics between ideologies and ideological positions? Thank you.
Yeah. I think that children is the focus of our unity. So one of the things I've been doing in Brussels is trying to get a certain alliance being built between what I call old school left. By old school left, I mean the non-identity left, people who believe in workers' rights and, sort of socialism. I don't know if you heard of socialism. A kind of, an element of transformation, and conservatives, trying to bring them together. And we have some people working with us who are old school left. Very recently, I met with some members of parliament from the Sarah Wagener group in Germany who are on the left, and we have relationships with religious organizations who are concerned for slightly different reasons than I or other kind of people. But you're right to say that this issue is so big that we need to forget about our petty political differences and unite as human beings, because there is a dehumanizing element here. And our children are on the front line that we cannot sacrifice. So, have got time for any more? Or? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Henry from Austria, and I'm a little bit pedantic, and I researched while you talked about this so-called EU Gender Prize, and it's actually called the European Gender Equality Champion price. And therefore, I think this differentiation and the word equality, gender equality instead of just gender, is quite important by it, and maybe gives it some nuance in a more positive direction than the first interpretation of just the gender price.
So,
in my interpretation.
So I'm not very nuanced, not like you. But the one thing I learned is that whenever they use the term gender equality, what matters is not the equality, but the gender. And the minute they do that, you know, it becomes a way of saying that there are diverse millions of genders, and that's basically the point.
I don't really have a question as much as a giant thank you for what you do, because I had just completed, I'm from New Zealand, and I just completed a 36 location roadshow around the country to try and educate parents on what's going on through the education system. And I got home from it, and the MCC Brussels document came out on comprehensive sexuality education with Dr. Joanna Williams, and I read it, and it was balm to my soul, horrifyingly, because it confirmed everything, the research that I had done in my own country. So I contacted her straight away and said, can I use that document but put the New Zealand information into it? Because it went into how much the EU withholds from a country if they don't implement comprehensive sexuality education. So I just want to thank you for your work, and I would love to connect with you. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, well, Joanna's work is really important because it brings to the public's attention something that parents are not aware of. They have no idea what this is. Just by the way, before I go, my new book came out last week. If you want to know what I'm about, Shameless Advertising. It's I just mentioned that because I'm interested in getting involved in a discussion with people like yourself about the sociological and the political aspect of the specific issues that we're discussing here. Thank you.